in English the information about the languages. So we have French, please help me, French on one, English two.
Channel 2. This is the Spanish on channel 3 and Italian on channel 4.
And then I shall start talking in French, if it's okay for everybody, since we have a translation. Donc.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Mutual Learning Seminar, which is organized thanks to Frank's Strategy, which is actually hosting us here today. We are starting with 5 minutes delay, but we have a very tight schedule and we have many different items on the agenda. So I suggest that we should be as disciplined as possible, as we have several languages. I'll be very short. I'd like to thank all of you for being present here today, and I would like to give the floor to Antoine de Boulet from France Stratégie, who is going to take the floor on behalf of France Stratégie, and then after that we will give you some information about the project itself, and we will have a short presentation on all the different issues that are not necessarily covered in the case studies, and subsequently we will look at some practices. Antoine, you have the floor. Good morning, everybody. I'm Antoine Le Boulet. I work at France Stratégie. I'm the Assistant Director of the Labor Skills Department. I'm delighted to welcome all of you here at France Stratégie. We are not one of the stakeholders of this project, but we are, of course, wholeheartedly in support of these sorts of projects. And this is why we are hosting the workshop in our premises. This subject is one that we're extremely interested in. We've been working with sharers and workers for many years now, and so we are very interested to see how this particular subject is dealt with nationally and at a European level, and also within trade unions. And this is why we're very happy to receive and welcome all of you here. I don't have anything more to add. I'd just like to wish you a very good day, interesting exchanges and discussions, and I am available, of course, at the breaks and at other moments to have discussions with you directly. Thank you. Let me give the floor to Sébastien Dupuche from the FO, who's part of one of the stakeholders, as he will give us some information about the project. However, I'd like to give you a little information about the way in which we are going to organize ourselves. I haven't put nameplates, so when you take the floor, please, at least the first time, introduce yourselves so that we can recognize you, and for the interpreters as well, this will be very useful so that we can actually identify you and say your names properly. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sébastien Dupuche. I am an advisor representing the union Force Ouvrière. I'm delighted to receive all of you here and welcome all of you here. And I'd like to thank France Stratégie for hosting this workshop. I'd also like to thank Ires and Odile Chani, who has helped a great deal in preparing today's session. Don't Gig Up is a project which was launched by the Brodolini Foundation, which is an Italian foundation, jointly with IRES, which is and also with the Polish Institute for Public Policies and several trade unions from Sweden, from Italy, Spain, Germany, and France. The aim of this project is to discuss access to labor rights and working rights for gig workers. The idea also is to cover all the different issues that concern gig workers and their expectations, but also the difficulties they have in actually obtaining any sort of social protection. I'll give the floor to Barbara later on, who will give us a little more information about the project and give us its background. But what is particularly important for us is that the project allows us to identify different goals and which makes it possible for gig workers to have certain rights. And this is based on specific case studies that we are going to be discussing. So what's interesting for us is to compare the case studies, look at what exists in our different countries, and understand how trade unions, how local authorities, government representatives, etc., handle these very vital issues. And I think what's important is to try and make sure that we are not fixed in certain preconceived positions, but also that we get beyond certain ideas that may actually not be fully understood. Now, today, we are actually going beyond perhaps the scope of our previous meetings. And so I'd like to give the floor to Barbara, who's going to give us a little more information, background information about the project, and then we will move to the case studies. So Odile, let me give you the floor. As you know, as you said, we have a very tight schedule. Thank you, Sebastian. Yes. Well, what we were planning on doing was to start off with an introduction which perhaps sets the stage and sets the stage and the scene so that we can understand what is actually at stake when we are dealing with gig work. I'd like to thank Barbara de Micheli from the Brodolini Foundation for giving us a short introduction on the organization of work and digitalization.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk in English because this was the agreement. I am from Fondazione Brodolini, where I am a senior manager, but at the same time I am implementing a research activity as a PhD in a framework that exists in Italy and I think exists also in your country, that is called industrial PhD. This means that I try to make an overview and a study of the activities I do in my work through a more academic and literary perspective. And my focus of research is organizational space. So where is the organizational space, and actually where is working going on in which space? When I am a colleague of Feliciano, and I have been working on this project when we were defining the proposal, and I thought that it was going to be interesting for you, but also for me, to get your feedbacks on what do you think about what's going on organizational space in a project that focuses on platform workers, because there is an issue on where are these workers working and which is the organizational space they are in. So the contribution I want to bring is just to share with you few, less than 10 minutes, impressions of what I got from my studies, helping that it might be useful for you and to see which are the challenges on the table. The first thing is that for a very long time in organizational studies there was no interest or very low interest towards space. All the or most of the studies were on timing, counting time, controlling time, but not that much on space, except the physical organization for productive activities. So only lately there was an interest towards the relation between the physical space and the environment in which the workers are. Possibly because now it becomes more and more irrelevant, the physical location of workers for a lot of workers. And This is, of course, linked to the digitalization processes. So a lot of activities can happen in a physical space that is not shared anymore by the workers involved, because we have a lot of digital devices that allow to create a virtual environment. And this is, so there is a technological aspect which is very, very important. And people, I mean, researchers try to talk about third spaces, liminal spaces, hybrid spaces, kind of spaces that are something in between virtual and real, physical. What happens is that we have the impression that we don't have any more temporal and spatial constraints. So the borders between what is working and where work happens and where is the rest of our life are frozen and going away. These softwares create new spatialities, which seems to be less controlled, but actually are much more controlled, because you can have a clear idea of what workers are doing when they are in a virtual space, tracking at each single activity much more than when they share a physical environment. And this, of course, on one side erodes the coordinates, the space-time coordinates of work, but at the same time creates new challenges and opportunities. I don't know if you are familiar with a quite recent publication by Eurofound that was had as title "Working Every Time, Anywhere," which is exactly not the point of the possible situation. And of course, this can be an opportunity. You can find ways to balance your private life. You can reduce commuting time. It can be a success for the environmental issues. But at the same time, asks for a new definition of the perimeters between individual life and working life. Again, there is an issue about autonomy. We have the impression, we have a debate in Italy about what we call smart working, which is remote working. It seems at the very beginning that this was a very good thing for workers' autonomy, but what is coming up from recent studies is that workers have autonomy in remote working if they had autonomy when they were in physical environment. If not, the level of control can be even stronger. So which are the opportunity and challenges? The issue of autonomy and control. The issue that despite virtual environment, we do have physical bodies. So this is something that we have to cope with. At a certain point, the physical elements comes back. And we see that also so-called virtual workers, like platform workers, try to find common spaces to work together. Some organizations provide spaces to gig economy workers so that they can meet, but there is this need of having at least temporary spaces where to stay together. Also, creative, innovative workers need spaces, physical spaces to exchange, and we have a lot of these creative lab, innovation labs, so spaces that are not belonging to one organization, so they are outside a single organization, but they create organizational spaces for workers to get together. And of course, from the perspective of industrial relations, it's very difficult to represent a community of workers that do not share a physical space, because physical spaces have been a crucial element in the creation of identities. And if you don't share a physical space, it's more difficult to have an identity and to find someone that can represent your needs and talk about your identity. So these are some of the questions I would like to leave you with. The first is, this is the question I'm still trying to answer, what is organizational space? When I began, I thought it was just trying to give a definition, but the definition is still not there. So I'm still working on that. Which kind of, how do the organizational processes change in the absence of a physical space? And can we still apply the old models or frameworks to understand the organization in the absence or in the limitation of a physical environment? And which kind of difficulties this implies for workers and for organizations that represent workers? So that's it. Thanks very much, and I will be happy to hear any comments maybe in the pauses and café. Thank you.
OK. Nous avions prévu de donner 5 minutes.
Thank you. We had planned to have 5 minutes for our discussions, and we're running 5 minutes late. So if some of you would like to react right away to what Barbara has said, you can take the floor, or else we can start off with our next session.
Well, just to feed the discussion, actually the disappearance of the physical space in a way maybe started even before digitalization. We think about agriculture. There is a physical space, but it's quite sparse. So many unions nowadays are reacting with that by going directly on the fields with some vans, trying to reach workers on the streets or on the place they gather. I'm wondering if this is going to be maybe an approach, as it seems to be, for instance, in Italy, also for the digital economy.
Merci beaucoup, Feliciano.
Thank you. Yes, that we have found that there are some trade union activities, again, which are affected by these spaces or lack of spaces. And we will be talking about this as well, the role of a collective space. So if there are no other comments, what I suggest is that we start with our mutual learning session 1. It's Michele Faioli from the Brodolini Foundation and myself who are going to be moderating this session. There are 2 case studies that we're going to be looking at. The first one concerns action that's taken by trade unions to organize workers and strengthen the expression of workers' rights. And then some of the new forms of cooperative work. And this is COP cycle, which we will hear about. And I'm delighted to say that we have a representative of the co-op cycle. It's Mathis, who is sitting at the back of the, right at the end of the room. Mathis, you could come closer if you wish. I'd just like to say that the cases that we're going to be looking at do not actually cover all the cases that have been identified in our Don't Gig Up project. We had to obviously choose some of them. And what we decided to do was either to present cases that are not covered that much in her general debates. So we've looked at some of the practical aspect of things from an administrative point of view, collective negotiations point of view, or from the way in which new spaces are used, new methods of work concerning the setting up of cooperatives, and the way in which all these practices, in fact, contribute to the analysis that has been carried out. And I think many of you have probably followed the OECD 2019 labor prospects or job prospects publication. In chapter 4, it gives us a very clear list of the practices that exist concerning workers' rights. And I think what's interesting in our project is that with those that we are presenting to you and the ones that we suggest we should discuss, we're actually moving away from the well-trodden track. So what we're trying to do is to move away from the things that we hear about all the time and perhaps have discussions about some things that are slightly different. And there are other areas where we have actually skipped over or excluded some suggestions or some cases. For example, we've decided not to look at jurisprudence or the legal aspect of things. We could have spent a whole day talking about that, but we decided not to. We thought that was not actually the point of today's meeting. And then also other agreements or collective agreements that exist, for example, in Germany particularly, Deliveroo, with Deliveroo or with others where there are special arrangements have been excluded as well. And we've also left out some of the other suggestions and organizations of systems that have been set up in Spain. It's not that we forgot about them. It was decided in a careful manner so that we can actually have discussions about these other aspects which are a little more unusual. Let me now give the floor to Anne Hercule, who will be introducing the cases. And then we have 8 minutes for each of the national cases so that we have as much time as possible for our discussions.
Merci, Odile.
Thank you, Odile.
Very happy to be here and to have this brainstorming with you all. We have the chance today to learn a lot because we are entering in the real body of this new phenomenon, gig workers. As Odile already stressed, we are using a method. We are pursuing this method. We should get the result by means of this method. And you know, we have on one side the union strategy and collective bargaining, on the other side law and whatever is parliament activities at national level, local level, and at the end we will have the chance to see also the enforcement. Maybe is the most useful, fruitful action that we have in our domestic legal systems nowadays. Maybe we should focus on that, and we should understand if labor judges, labor inspectorate are moving on these topics and are trying to understand if any kind of dissimulation, frauds, and violations of our collective bargaining and laws are in place in order to avoid the application of social and labor protection for these workers. So this is our methods. We have to continue on that, and we have the chance today, as I said at the beginning of my short speech, that we will have the chance to learn a lot. So let's go on. And we have the first section, unions engagement in measures to organize workers' strength, workers' voice. Yeah, you have the German colleagues. Thank you.
Ce que nous proposons, c'est que vous fassiez.
What we propose is that you make all the presentations. Then we continue in French. Everyone should make the presentation, and then we'll have a general discussion after all the presentations have been made.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm Tom. Essen Institute Work Skills and Training. I'm working on all kinds of labor issues, labor relations issues, and so on. And I've got the pleasure to present you two cases from Germany, two cases of union initiatives to cope with gig work in the sense of crowd work and physical gig work, so to say. And one of them is the initiative by the metal workers union IG Metall, which is called Fair Crowd Work. And this initiative started in 2014, 2015, when a book by Christiane Benner was edited. Christiane Benner today is the second chair of the metal workers union, and she edited a book about crowd work. And in this book she said that it's important also for organizations like the IG Metall to cope with crowd work, to deal with it, because online work will have, she argued, an impact on the working conditions of all workers, and moreover, crowd workers deserve a fair pay and a good job. And thirdly, if the union won't deal with crowd workers, we might get a kind of social setback, which would bring us back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So that's why she said it's important to deal with it. And in the same year, the union started the Fair Crowd Work project by developing a Fair Crowd Work platform. And the main idea of this platform was that crowd workers should have a platform to evaluate platforms, to rate platforms, and to communicate their experiences about platform work. So that was the main idea, and that's what they did. And 1 year later, they try to renew this kind of platform. They reworked it in the way that they said, okay, we don't want crowd workers directly to rate the platforms they are working on, because we cannot say if a crowd worker is really worked for such a platform. It's just an individual thing. We cannot prove that. And it might be that crowd workers are rating platforms they never worked for. So the idea now was to really make a survey among platform workers on the platforms. That is to launch a questionnaire on the platforms and to give the workers on the platforms the possibility to fill that out, so that it's clear that the platform workers are really working for the platforms they are rating. And the union decided then to pay them a fee for that, to pay them 10 to 14 euros, so that this filling out of the questionnaire is a kind of platform work. It's just another piece of work they do to give, in order to ensure that they get enough questionnaires back. So that's what they did, and they. On the one hand, they try to post this questionnaire directly on the platforms, but that's not technically possible on all the platforms. So in other cases, they try to get into contact with platforms and ask them if it's possible to post this questionnaire on the platforms. So this was the first time they really started to talk with platforms. And some platforms really accepted that, so that they now have were able to post this questionnaire on I think on about 12 or 14 platforms, and they ask several questions like, what are the wages, what are the experiences with communication of on the platform, what are the experiences with the reputation system, so that you get a fairly broad impression on what is going on the platforms by these, of course, non-representative, but nevertheless by these surveys. And for each platform rated, they got about 50 to 150 questionnaires back. So it's not representative, but it's a fairly huge amount of questionnaires they could build on their analysis. And you can find all the results of these platforms on this Fair Crowd Work platform. You just have to click on that, and you can click on the respective platforms, and you will see analysis of the wage development compared to the average wages of all the platforms rated, and so on. So it's really interesting to have a look at that. If you want to get an impression on what's really going on platforms, the Fair Crowd Work platform is I think, a very good instrument to do this. So however, they then started with another strategy, a second pillar of the strategy, so to say, because they had the impression, oh, it's possible to talk with platforms. Yeah, it's possible they are willing to talk with us. So the second strategy then started in 2016, 2017, was to get into contact with more platforms and to talk with them. And to get into discussion with them, and to develop an influence on what happens on platforms via communicating with platforms. So that's a kind of second pillar of the strategy. And the conditions for doing that in Germany were quite well, because in 2015 a couple of German-based platforms came together and developed a code of conduct for platforms, a code of conduct on which they because the platforms wanted to do something against the rather bad public opinion they were facing. Platform work was not very popular at the time, and they wanted to get into the offensive. That's why they developed this code of conduct, in which they said they will offer fair work, they will offer good communication processes, and so on. So they really, it's a kind of self-obligation to be a good employer, so to say. That's what they did there. And at the same time, the union, the IG Metall, met with other unions from other countries, from the US, from Canada, from Denmark, from Sweden. In 2017, they had a common conference, and conference they developed the so-called Frankfurt Declaration, the Declaration of Frankfurt, because the headquarters of the IG Metall is in Frankfurt. And in this declaration they said that the union's demand for paying wages according to the national minimum wages, giving social security for the workers, and so on. So they developed a list of demands, and with these demands, the union went to communication processes with the platforms. And they talked about these things, and the platforms always said with wages is a very difficult issue. On the one hand, they are offering work on a global scale, so it's very important, very difficult to. It would be very difficult to pay according to national standards. And moreover, they argued, the platforms argued, the workers, the crowd workers, are not really interested in their pay. It's more about fun. It's more about the contents of work. Yeah? The pay is a secondary issue for the workers. And the IG Metall contested that, and then both IG Metall and the platforms had the idea to make another survey about that and to ask the workers how important is the wage for them. And the result was of this survey that wages are rather important. It's the most important issue, much more important than the fun you have in work. And the platforms were surprised by that. And that was a good starting point for further discussions with the platforms. The platforms then decided to renew this code of conduct and to state in this new code of conduct that they will pay fees according to the local standards, which does not mean according to the national minimum wages, but according to local standards, so that there are differences in pay between different countries according to the local standards they have. That was really a kind of important step. But nevertheless, the union is trying to get closer to this minimum wage demand. What they did then was another important step. They developed an ombuds office. An ombuds office to solve individual conflicts and cases on the platforms. And this ombuds office is composed of two representatives of the platforms, with its platforms organized in this code of conduct. Yeah, this ombuds office is composed of two representatives of the platforms, two representatives of the workers, one of the IG Metall and one employee, and one neutral person, which is a labor judge. And they solved up to, as I was told, 30-40 cases up to now. And they agreed on a common solution on that. So they introduced a new kind of conflict solution process based on a kind of social partnership approach with members from both sides, employees as well as the platforms. So and today, to come to the end with this presentation, today the IG Metall tries to rework the Fair Crowd Work platform for a third time, and to give more scope to this question of how should these general terms and conditions, which are very important, by which the platforms define what kind of work is done there, how the legal conditions of work are, how good these general terms of how the general terms of conditions should be looked like, how to develop good general terms and conditions. That will be an important point, because the union argues that it's easy to by the general terms and conditions to define whether a worker is a worker or a self-employed. You can define this in these general terms and conditions. So it's very important to have a look at that. And moreover, the union wants to get a step further in this in membership recruitment. They want to do more for recruiting crowd workers. They had some success in that, but they said it's really difficult to recruit workers that are not co-present in a physical space, because there's no union secretary who can go to an establishment and talk with the people directly. So they want to develop new ways to do that. For instance, more presence on the social media channels and so on. So that's what they try to do now. Yeah, thanks a lot for the attention on this. This was a short description on what's happening in this Fair Crowd Work platform. I've got the pleasure to present a second example of a union initiative. This is the Advice for Self-Employed, organized by the other big German union, Verdi, the service sector union, organizing several industries in the service sector. And the starting point here, also this initiative had a kind of starting point, and the starting point here was a research project that was financed by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, in which the union took part together with researchers from the University of Kassel and from a labor research institute in Munich, and they wanted to develop something for this phenomenon of crowd and gig work, and the main goal of the union was to develop some kind of recommendations for works councils how to cope with gig work and crowd work. What could they do if they observe it in their organizations? Yeah, some kind of recommendations for action. And the problem then was, within the project, it became soon clear that there is no information about the extent of the phenomena of crowd work and gig work in the organization, and the question was, who is really affected in Verdi, affected by this new development, and so the first thing they tried to do then was to gather some information on that. How widespread is it in the organization? How far are different organizational departments affected by that? And they then got the information that it's mainly the phenomena of crowd work is mainly relevant in the telecom and IT services area, and in the media division of the union, but in most of the divisions of the union, and there are many others for the social services and so on, for retail, they are not affected by that. That was one result. And an other result was that it's important to sensitize works councils for this problem in the union, because they did this, I've forgotten to tell you, they did this on the basis of a survey they made among trade union officials and works councils. Yeah, they made a survey among them, and these are the results of the survey, that many works councils do not even know what crowd work might be. They identified it with some communication on social media or so. They really didn't have an impression on what that might be. So a first important step would be they concluded to sensitize works councils for the problem and to tell them what that might be. On the other hand, a second conclusion was that many crowd workers do not want to be regarded as workers, as dependent employees, but really they want to be regarded as self-employed. So that the stance of the union couldn't be to go to the crowd workers and to tell them, hey, we want you to be workers so that we can make collective bargaining agreements for you. But that kind of other approach had to be developed. And this approach was at Verdi to advise, to regard these crowd workers more or less as self-employed, and to offer them consultancy as self-employed. And there was a good starting point for that in the union, because they already had a kind of office or department who offered consultancy for self-employed, which had its origins in the media industry, where journalists have been working as self-employed for decades now. And the union has early developed a kind of consultancy for these workers, offering them consultancy concerning contracts, social security, legal advice, fair fees and wages, and so on. So what the union did was to open this already existing instrument of consultancy for self-employed also to crowd and gig workers. And not forget to mention that the consultancy is free of charge for union members. So it's a kind of incentive to become union member if you want to get this consultancy free of charge. Yeah? So this is a kind of membership incentive. All in all, I was told that Verdi at the moment organizes about 30,000 self-employed. Of course, the bulk of them are not click workers or crowd workers or gig workers, but most of them are journalists and this traditional groups of self-employed. Crowd work only has a little share, and all in all, offline platform work seems to be much more important for especially in the social services or so, yeah, is much more important in terms of numbers than crowd work for the union. So I was told that for the union, and the question what the union should do more besides that, if the union should invest more for membership recruitment, for example, it really is an issue of costs and benefits, and how much investment you will put in a relatively small group of employees. That's an important question. However, the union started with a second pillar, very similar to the IG Metall, because they then try to get into contacts with platforms, and into contact with platforms, and to start to communicate with platforms, in order to influence what's going on platforms. On the one hand, to share information with the platforms, and also to identify common interests. For instance, a common interest to develop something like a social security systems for all employees, whether they are self-employed or dependent workers or whatever, a common system. Yeah, this is something which is also in the interest of the platforms, because then they don't have to cope with this problem. And so they try to develop common interests which they can articulate in the political sphere. Of course, the final goal of Verdi in this is to get to some kind of collective bargaining with the platforms about the conditions of work. But however, this is really a long-term goal and far away from reality. So thanks a lot for your attention. That was the second story from German trade unions.
Merci beaucoup, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Gabriel Stürker from Verdi is with us too. So let me ask you, Gabriel, to speak in the course of the discussion, if you have any remarks to make regarding that presentation. Let's now go on to Spain. Oh, wait, I have an announcement. Feliciano reminded me of this. We can record the proceedings, which will make it easier for us to report back, to make a report, or to draw the conclusions from this. If any of you don't want your submission to be recorded, please let us know now. Otherwise, we will be RGPE compliant. We won't use this. We won't use the recordings for any other purpose. Anyway, we have someone from the National Commission for Informatics and Freedom with us, who's going to make sure that we use the recordings properly. So, if you want to take notes, go ahead, because our final document can also draw on your notes. I know some of you are fantastic note takers.
S'il n'y a pas d'objection.
No objection. Let's now go on to Spain. Martina, go ahead.
To everyone, I'm going to talk in Spanish.
La consigne, c'est qu'il faut tenir les casques loin de.
Bueno, en primer lugar,
First of all, I would like to thank Odile for all the work accomplished in order to prepare for this meeting. And I'd particularly like to thank her for making an effort to get interpretation from and into Spanish. I recall that when I was preparing for the meeting, I said that I'd heard that there was some problem with the Spanish, and I said, I think that I can understand 60 to 70%